Now joining us on Voices of Reason, we're pleased to be joined by Representative Jordan Harris. Harris is the House Majority Appropriations Chair. He was elected to the U.S. House in 2012 and represents Philadelphia. Representative Harris, thanks so much for joining us today on Voices of Reason.
Thank you so much for having me.
I wanted to start by asking about the Pennsylvania state budget. Obviously, a 135-day impasse between the statutory date when it was required to be signed and when it was actually put into place. Governor Shapiro made a point of mentioning 220, 230 days since he had proposed it until the resolution came about. What would you say was the biggest hurdle to getting it accomplished?
So, the governor always likes to talk about how we have a divided legislature where you have um, Democrats are in control of the House, Republicans are in control of the Senate, and the governor, of course, is a Democrat. And that means that there has to be um, compromise or consensus built to get anything done. And something as large as the budget, there is always a need for consensus to be able to get that over the finish line. And so, for me, I think what this showed is that while there were great disagreements, we were able to stay at the table and continue to negotiate to get a product done that I believe represents many of our priorities in the House Democratic Caucus with regards to Pennsylvanians and how we move the Commonwealth forward.
Let's talk a little bit about the rainy day fund. I know Senate Republicans were adamant in a lot of respects about not drawing that down. How big a factor did that come into play in once again, the final resolution?
Well, for our Senate Republican colleagues, I know it was extremely important that we continued to have certain amount of money in the rainy day fund. And let me be clear, House Democrats are also worried about the fiscal stability of the Commonwealth. I mean, the reason why we are where we are today is because we've been doing well and being good stewards of the taxpayers' resources here at the state level. But here's what we also have to understand. The Commonwealth has required expenses, just like many of you watching this have required expenses, whether it be your mortgage or your electric bill or your gas bill or your insurance or whatever. Just like you have those bills, so does the Commonwealth, and just like the bills at home go up, so do the Commonwealth's bills. So we have required things that we have to do, but then also we have a requirement, in my mind, to make significant investments in the areas that we believe will give us a good return on the taxpayers' resources. And that's really what I believe this budget represents.
Could you share some of those things, the things that you felt best about the budget?
Oh, well, look, we have a Commonwealth Court ruling that says how we fund public education in Pennsylvania is unconstitutional. What you saw in this budget is us making a continued investment on education and a continued investment in the adequacy of education funding, making sure that there are resources going to the school districts who have been underfunded. In addition to that, you see increase that we've made to DHS and to the responsibilities of paying for Medicaid and for the health care and for the services of many of Pennsylvania's most vulnerable populations. We did that. And in addition to that, we were able to um, institute a new tax credit, the Working Pennsylvanians Tax Credit, which is literally putting money back into the pockets of working families across this Commonwealth. Listen, we understood a year or two ago the rising cost of childcare, which is why we passed the child dependent tax credit at the state level. We also now understand that there's rising costs for working families. And so that's why we put the Working Pennsylvania tax credit into this year's budget. And so, those are things, there's some other things, but those are things that I am really, really proud to say that we accomplished in this year's budget.
Let me expound a little bit on the tax credit. That mirrors the federal tax credit. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it mirrors the federal earned income tax credit at the 10% mark, which is basically 10% of what you could get at the feds, you'd be able to get at the state. And, our hope is that that'll continue to grow and that we'll be able to do more. But about 800,000, north of 800,000 Pennsylvanians will see money being returned to them in their tax return. And that's literally hard dollars that they'll be able to get in their pocket.
Let me ask you a little bit more about the education funding. Certainly, closing the adequacy gap is something that the Commonwealth Court ordered. But what about cyber charter schools, and how did that discussion go?
Well, listen, I've always been supportive of parents having options for their children. Um, but when you have those options, you have to make sure that we're holding those institutions accountable. And what we saw from a report from the Auditor General is that there were several charter schools, cyber charter schools, who were banking hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars, who were taking those dollars and going out and buying real estate portfolios. The bottom line is, for me, it just didn't make sense how we were spending so much in our cyber charter space uh, when there's no requirement to actually have a building for the young people. And I know there are other expenses, but the truth is we had been overfunding them. That's why they were able to build such large reserves. And those reserves are taxpayer dollars that should be in the classroom. So about 178 million of those dollars will be returned to the school districts where these cybers are taking students from, so that those school districts can put that money back into the classroom.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about mass transit. There was a lot of discussion during the impasse about funding, whether it's Pittsburgh Regional Transit or something close to home for you is SEPTA. But there was no new funding made available for those two organizations and others throughout the Commonwealth. Is that something that you think there's might be a little window open for the next year's budget to accomplish?
Well, listen, mass transit is something that I'm disappointed to say was left undone in this budget, and not because it wasn't a priority for our caucus, because it was, and it continues to be a priority for us. I'm from the Southeast region. I know how important SEPTA is. But you should know how important SEPTA is, because even if you don't live in southeastern Pennsylvania, what happens in those 5 counties that SEPTA covers, the economics that happens there represent about 40% of the total revenue for this state. 40%. And so when you think about people who are going back and forth to work on SEPTA, children who are going back and forth to school, folks who are going back and forth to doctor's appointments. SEPTA is important in southeastern Pennsylvania for all of Pennsylvania. And depending on where you are, it could be PRT if you're out in the west, or Lanta up in the northeast. The bottom line is mass transit connects us, but mass transit also fuels the economy of this Commonwealth. And so it is something that was left undone in this year's budget, but it's something that remains a priority for us. It's something that we need to get done. And folks need to understand that not only were we trying to do mass transit, we're trying to do mass transit and roads and bridges. This is infrastructure funding, and we need to get it done in Pennsylvania.
Let me follow up on that because I grew up in the central part of the state, and I know there's a lot of animosity sometimes in rural Pennsylvania about a lot of money being given to Philadelphia or Pittsburgh. Did you find that there was some issue amongst during the discussions of rural representatives maybe not truly understanding what you just said, that 40% of the economics flow through southeastern Pennsylvania?
Well, I won't say people don't understand. I think people are well aware of it. I think people try to ignore the fact, and not address it. And quite honestly, sometimes not tell their constituents the truth. Listen, we have to be real. There are counties in Pennsylvania that don't have 10,000 folks in. Counties, right? Counties with full county governments and the likes. And listen, I have no problem with my taxpayer dollars going to help fund roads and bridges and other projects in those counties. That's what a commonwealth is about. It is the common good for all. But what you also have to understand is that when you have regions that drive the resources, and that fuels the economy, there are infrastructure needs that have to happen so that that industry can continue to move. Listen, we know that there are buses being pulled off of the streets in Philadelphia, and that there are trains being pulled off because they're unsafe. That stops the economy. that stops money from being made in the Southeast that gets sent to the places across Pennsylvania that needs resources. You know, that's what the Commonwealth is about, what it means. And so we have to be truth tellers in many parts of the state. Folks who don't necessarily use SEPTA or PRT out in Pittsburgh, but who get to benefit from it. Not only that, there are industries and businesses in other parts of the state who make machines and parts and different things that are used in buses in Pittsburgh and buses in Lehigh Valley and buses that are in the southeastern part of the state. Those folks are vendors for these mass transit agencies. So I think it's foolish for us. It's what do they say? Cut off your nose to spite your face. It is very foolish to the longevity of our Commonwealth for people to look at mass transit regionally. Mass transit is good for all Pennsylvania.
You mentioned that mass transit was probably one of your biggest disappointments in this year's budget process. Was there anything else that perhaps caught you off guard that did not get accomplished?
Well, look, I mean, the governor had his proposal, and there's a lot of other things that were in the governor's proposal that we weren't able to get across the finish line. Um, what I am very, very pleased about is the investments that we're making in people. What I'm pleased about is the investments that we're making to keep Pennsylvanians safe and on their health care. What I'm pleased about is even though, we know that the state's not going to be able to make up what the federal government is cutting, but there are places where we were able to soften the blow, and some of our food programs are things that we've been able to increase revenue to. Those are things that I am very, very pleased about that this budget does. Is it a perfect budget? No, no budget is. I don't think anybody ever passes a budget and say, "Oh, I got everything that I wanted."
Right.
No, that's not how this happens. But what I can say is that I believe that this budget is financially prudent. This budget is balanced, and this budget moves Pennsylvania forward.
Some folks were were critical of Governor Shapiro for quote unquote not being able to bring both sides together before 135 days to get things done sooner. What was his involvement in the budget process, and how did he assist in bringing the sides together
I
to
think
the
that's an I think that is an inaccurate accounting of the governor. I mean, the governor was involved and fully engaged in the budget process, and so was his staff. From TJ Yablonsky, secretary that works with legislative affairs, to Ori Munson and Zach over in the budget office, to Dana Fritz, his chief of staff. The governor's office was very involved in this process and was very hands-on with meeting with different principal leaders and bringing different folks together. And our staffs are always, and we're very involved. I mean, my office was in constant communication with our counterparts over in the Senate Republican caucus and working through the nuts and bolts, the logistics of the budget, going line by line to look at, line items to make sure that the numbers were in the right place. So, the governor continues to lead this Commonwealth. He continues to be a leader in this country, and his work on the budget is just another testament to his leadership ability to bring sides together to get things done.
Was it a disappointment to House Democrats that there was no agreement with Senate Republicans about new revenue sources in the Commonwealth?
Well, listen, we passed one part of the governor's revenue package, which was the legalization of adult use cannabis. For me, I think we should have done it a while ago, but I think most Pennsylvanians agree, most Americans agree that we should legalize cannabis, and many of the states around us have already done so. Quite honestly, my friends in South Jersey are very happy that Pennsylvania has not legalized adult use cannabis because they get to literally reap the benefits. Excuse the pun, but they get to reap the benefits of us not passing adult use cannabis when so many people from the southeastern part of the state cross right over the border into New Jersey to get legalized cannabis, and so we need to do it. We're literally leaving money on the table by not legalizing adult use cannabis. So we did that in the House, and we're waiting the Senate to either move on our bill or send us their own bill, or something around it. I think we definitely need to talk about um, revenue and the things that were in the governor's budget proposal, skill games, adult use cannabis. I think are the ways to go.
Would it be fair to say, as we talk about the fiscal year 26-27 budget that will be delivered by the governor in February, less than 3 months away, is it fair to say, maybe I shouldn't put words in your mouth, that maybe the three biggest priorities for next year for House Democrats are going to be education, mass transit, and, as you said, legalizing cannabis?
Well, I would say you would not be far off by talking about those things. But let me be honest. But I think we should also be clear. I mean, many of these things have been priorities for us for a while, and we've been able to get a lot of things achieved on many of these topics. But I think you'd be safe to say that they will be a part of what we see as priorities for our caucus.
I've fired off a lot of questions of you, but I wanted to give you the opportunity to have the last word. Anything that you'd like to let our listeners know about what played out over the summer months and the completion of the budget?
Well, look, I think what I would say is that I'm proud of the perseverance that we saw out of our caucus and out of our members, um, staying engaged and staying together with regards to what our priorities were. Um, at the state level, um, we held fast to our principles, to the things that were important to us, and delivered a budget that we believe moves the state in the right direction. The money that goes into our school districts is not just a number. It represents a school nurse that's going to see your child when they're sick. It represents a counselor that your child will be able to talk to when they are dealing with issues. It represents a counselor that your child's going to have to talk to about college. It represents investments in our school buildings to rid them of toxins like asbestos and other things. It represents money in our schools for mental health services for our young people. But this budget also represents taking care of grandma and grandpa. It also represents taking care of our brothers and sisters with intellectual disabilities. Listen, budgets aren't just documents with numbers, they're people behind those numbers. And I stand proud knowing that we're taking care of some of the most vulnerable Pennsylvanians with this budget, while also tending to the needs of our business community and others to move the Commonwealth forward.
And that is a perfect place to leave it. My thanks to Representative Jordan Harris, the House Majority Appropriations Chair, and representing the good people of the city of Brotherly Love. Representative Harris, thanks for joining us today on Voices of Reason.
Thanks for having me.
Now I'm pleased to be joined on Voices of Reason by State Senator Scott Martin. Martin is the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, a graduate of Millersville University, did I get this right? One of the 150 greatest football players and wrestlers in PSAC history. Very impressive, Senator Martin. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today.
Well, thanks for having me, Steve. It's great to be with you.
And in case everyone wanted, that is what the logo on his lapel is. It is wrestling, as opposed to what I thought it was earlier. 135 days went past from the statutory date of when the Pennsylvania budget should have been completed. What was the biggest hurdle in your mind to getting it done?
Well, I think there's a couple things. One, there can never be an expectation that only one side's going to get wins in a certain budget. And that's something, especially when you saw what ended up being policy wins in the end, that we would claim as being good for Pennsylvania. We're finally entered into the conversation. I also think the intricacy of and I'm sure you're aware of the SEPTA discussion and almost battle here, related to that was a really big piece of that throughout the year. But I'm a numbers guy. And for me, the biggest thing is where does the number add up? All right, if the number has to rise, are there significant economic development or policy wins that'll help grow Pennsylvania's economy to generate more state tax revenue that we need? Because at the end of the day, I sound like a broken record because I've been speaking it since I began my term 3 years ago. There was a runway that we were on in terms of the amount of money we were bringing in versus what the rate of growth of expenditures were. And that pace has put us in a position, and if you were to directly ask me how I feel about this budget, it's very mixed feelings for me because at one standpoint, I think there's some great opportunity in here to kind of turn around some of PA's economic challenges and demographic challenges, which we've been focused on. But I also know this. We have about a $200 million general fund balance that's left, and that was deliberate in case there's some wiggle room with where revenues end up in this given year. But make no mistake about it, we've come to the end of the road now here, and we're going to be faced with close to about $5 billion structural deficit. And if the revenues of the economy don't improve, next year's election is really going to be telling. There's a clear choice now what's going to happen. Either you want to rein in that spending to be more in lines with revenue, or you're going to go with folks that want to raise taxes in order to close that gap. And as much as I hear people talking about issues related to weed or related to games of skill, okay, $800 million a year, that's great, right? That's wonderful. But we're talking about a $5 billion structural deficit. So the games are over. And so in a weird way, I'm a little unsettled by that. And you'll see that probably as we've already focused the next day, we're already focused on the next cycle of things and getting that process started. What we do next year in terms of that rainy day fund, do we unwind it? Do we get all the negativity that comes with that? And of course, where do you right size where you can? And with divided government, it's very difficult to navigate that. And so the voters are going to play a big piece in what they send back to Harrisburg will really determine what the next 2 years are going to look like in my mind.
I think you made a good point talking about the structural deficit. You have a rainy day fund in the Commonwealth that is about $7.4 billion. It seemed like that was very important to the caucus to make sure that that wasn't tapped.
Yeah. Well, and I tell people, I've done budgets for a long time. You only can use one-time sources of revenue, and anything that's taken out of that is a one-time infusion of cash. And so it would grow your structural deficit even further. And we went from coming out of COVID, one of the worst states in the country with no money in reserve. I think we had $150,000, which is enough money to operate state government probably for like 10, 15 minutes. We had a negative outlook by the rating agencies. We had a lower bond rating, which means we were paying higher on our debt. And of course, if there was any kind of tragedy, a tornado ripping through Bucks County, flooding in the northern tier, we had nothing in reserve at the time that we could potentially help right away. Right. So now we fought, and there were big wins for us negotiating towards the end of Governor Wolf's last 2 years, and then in the beginning with Governor Shapiro to build that up. And wouldn't you know it, we get a positive outlook from the rating agencies. We've gotten bond upgrades, and we've actually been able to refinance debt and save hundreds of millions of dollars from having that money in reserve. And more importantly, the Trump administration has actually made some changes to emergency management down in DC, where they want states to have more skin in the game when it comes to this. Well, now we have this sitting there that we're able to do that. And I would hate to see the position that the Commonwealth would be in, one, if we continue to use one-time sources of revenue, because again, you don't have a way to replace it the following year. But secondarily, not having money for emergencies, and then we'll get negative outlooks and bond downgrades. It'll make our debt more expensive anytime we potentially need it. So, the fiscal stability portion of the Commonwealth is really important. And I'm really hopeful that we can start to see some of these economic policies we've been striving for, or the Grow PA educational program to keep more of our students here, or to grow our energy sector to bring down costs for families, and pretty much when energy, everything across the board, food production, hospital care, that we can start turning around some of this, because ultimately the better our economy does, it generates tax revenue, right? And we're able to do things. But until that happens, and I know affordability is really important for families in PA right now, and I really believe that if we do something that moves us in the direction of saying, oh, hey, by the way, we're going to have to take another $1,800 for a family of four, in less than 2 years, that's not really good for a state that needs to compete and grow. And so that's kind of where we find ourselves right now.
When I looked at the budget, it didn't appear that was any agreement on really new revenue sources. How close did Senate Republicans and House Democrats come to whether it was legalizing weed? I think for example, one of the things you mentioned.
I would say with the weed issue, I didn't see going much of anywhere because I think there's some significant concern over learning lessons of some other states. Like, how about you build a regulatory framework first and tout the protections? Like, how are you going to keep it out of the youth hands? Are you going to get the technology that when someone's pulled over on the side of the road, that you can test for it right away? Or for insurance purposes for businesses and others, how much does THC period of time need to be out of your system before you drive that school bus full of little kids or before you operate a forklift in a warehouse? And unfortunately, often in life, you see governments that want to jump in right away, fully into the pool, right? And then deal with the consequences after. There's Second Amendment considerations that come to this as well. There's other things that people need. How about we sort this out? Does the federal government change the classification from being a Schedule 1 narcotic to one that's Schedule 2 that can be researched? There's so many things in the pipeline now. But, I also get concerned over some of the projections of revenue that I saw for that or for the games of skill, which quite frankly was the same proposals from a year ago, but somehow magically became double in terms of the marijuana revenue than we saw, and also games of skill was multiplied by 5. And to me, that's not good policy planning. The other part of this is we've never really seen the expectation of what politicians tout as, oh, this is going to generate X. Well, it never comes to that. And no one ever talks about, especially for states that may have legalized or done things, how much are you spending on the other side as well, too? Because there's been studies that have shown that some states are actually spending more dealing with it than they were bringing in revenue in terms of it. So there were some considerations of that. I'm a big proponent that one thing that I would love to see Pennsylvania do here in the future, there is way too many winners and losers in Pennsylvania's tax code. Things that, people probably would be stunned about. And if we could, I believe in a wide base and a low rate. Right. And when you pick winners and losers with certain industries or certain things, it makes a higher rate that other people then would have to pay in order to, get a product. I think it could help generate more revenue for Pennsylvania. So I'm definitely open to that. And of course, I want to have a very competitive tax structure while we're moving with the corporate net income tax or the net operating loss carry forward. Because things that we get tagged on is why entities don't choose to invest in Pennsylvania. And it's a wide array of things, whether it's energy. We lost a huge competition for a huge milk processing facility, which, for an area where I come from, Lancaster County and PA, it's a pretty big deal. We lost it to Syracuse, New York, and they point to our CNIT rate, and they point to Pennsylvania's really brutal and archaic permitting process where people can get shovels in the ground faster in other places. So, but these are the things that we're working on. And I really feel, though I may be unhappy with what the spend number is right now, and I know we're going to have some upcoming battles related to that, we have put pieces of the puzzle in place, whether it's with workforce development and post-secondary education, whether it's with being competitive for growth, transparency, and more expediency in our permitting process, that hopefully we can say, hey, Pennsylvania is ready for growth. And for a state that has the fastest growing age demographic of being 80 and above, and now we have the smallest kindergarten class enrollment statewide since 1986 moving its way through the system, we desperately, desperately need that. And hopefully we can turn a corner and start seeing some of the benefits of these investments that are being touted, whether they're with data centers or with energy or whatever it might be, because we really need that to kind of keep our head above water in this state and start to grow more.
You mentioned when we started the conversation that you had mixed feelings about the budget. It opens the door. What did you feel best about, and what were you most disappointed by?
So listen, I'll just get out of the way. And so that conversation we just had about finances is the most, because that's the hat I wear as appropriations chairman. And if you happen to watch any of my hearings over the last 3 years, that structural deficit has been something that I've been ringing an alarm about. And now, again, we're now officially in the corner. The corner was approaching, but now our backs are in the corner. So it'll make next year's budget really interesting too. But in terms of things that I'm happy about, I was the author of the Grow PA program, which we got out of here unanimously and signed by the governor. And I'm happy to report, boy, we've had over 11,000 Pennsylvania kids who have chosen to get into a high demand field in Pennsylvania, and then agree to work in that high demand field and live in Pennsylvania, to try to stop some of this drain. So we were able to increase that initial $25 million investment, which filled up in just a matter of weeks, by the way, because it's first come, first serve. We were able to expand that by about $7.5 million, so provide more opportunities for kids, because we only probably could take about 5,000 that first time around. In addition to that, probably for me, I've always said I think one of the keys to Pennsylvania's economic success and moving forward is energy. I'm a big believer that affordable, reliable energy is a real key component of a successful economy, especially for a state that historically, where manufacturing has been important, things like food processing, and that threat of that carbon tax through the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which was the equivalent of about a $1.2 to $1.3 billion increase in costs overall for Pennsylvania energy ratepayers. Now, it's not just the bill you open up, at your kitchen table saying, "Oh my goodness, my energy rates are growing up." It's also, everything else in your life becomes more expensive because, anything that relies on electricity to make something, it becomes more expensive. So I was really pleased with that, and to have that done legislatively now, to take the uncertainty away as to, well, how is the Supreme Court going to rule? Or are you going to have, like New Jersey did all this entering into interstate agreements via executive order, right? And they've gone in, and they went out, and they went in again. It's really evident that a lot of the big energy investment has been going to places like Ohio, West Virginia, the Gulf Coast. Now Pennsylvania is going to offer a little more predictability and stability because of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative not being part of this equation anymore. And also with the fact that our permitting wins and getting this permitting reform and deemed approved for certain types of permits, transparency as to where is your permit and part of this process. Oh, and now you have the ability to appeal. And so these are things that states that have been successful in growing have offered, and hopefully it's just another attractive thing for Pennsylvania. Those would probably be the biggest things I would claim as wins. I will also say that I'm really proud of our appropriations team because we spent a very long time. If you ever heard the term lapsed funding for you or your viewers, funding that has been appropriated in the past but was never spent. And Pennsylvania's setup is one that it should be returned to the general fund, but it's not. Governors maintain control of it. And it's to the tune, it was close to $1 billion worth of prior year lapsed funding that I call it looking in the couch cushions, for quarters and nickels. We're able to wrestle back a lot of that in negotiations and then rebase, meaning reset those line items in the budget to where they were actually spending that money, what the real number was. And that's really good. And I was proud of our team. And that was really tedious work in that. You might be shocked, but governors don't like to give up some of their spending authority, even if it's from the past. So, but I was proud of that. Another thing I may have been disappointed in, I'll be honest with you, as I shared some of our demographic challenges with you, boy, is it really tough to right-size things in PA if things are going in the other direction. Yes, as much as I would expect that with our aging demographic, we'll have more expenses related to long-term care, very expensive Medicaid, stuff like that. It's really a difficult thing when we have a way we fund public K through 12 education in Pennsylvania. No school ever sees a penny less than they did the year before. Right. But I put that in perspective. When you have schools that are losing more than 25% of their enrollment in the last few years, and are continuing on that trend, is the goal that we continue to say no dollar less than the year before? And what that's done, it's created, talk about equity as much as that term's thrown around. We have some students being educated in PA to about $40,000 per student. And you have others that are spending about 12 or 13. And if you want to make it even more maddening, if you overlay proficiency results on that, you wonder why are the ones who are spending $40,000 per student getting a lot worse outcomes or not proficient in math or English or science, and the ones that are spending less are doing great. So we have to find a way ultimately to have these tough decisions. The same thing applies, and I know it won't make people happy when I say this, we went and done a lot of work on criminal justice reform, I know, over my time here. We went from being a state that was spending millions of dollars to rent bed space in other states because we didn't have enough room, to one now where we could afford to close a couple of our SCIs. And each of those SCIs can run us about 100 million per year to run. And if you don't need the excess capacity, why are we still paying for it? We are working with them. I think we're moving in that direction. It's not easy because some of these things are like anchors in their community. But you can also say the same thing about some, we're very oversubscribed in higher education facilities. You saw what Penn State went through in terms of having to close things. But we perpetually have some institutions, like even in our state system, that they're literally operating at 10% of the capacity that they were designed for. And it's really either taxpayers or students through higher tuition that are kind of propping these things up. And you shouldn't have schools that have 12 professors in a department with 10 kids in a major. It's just not right. So those aren't easy discussions, but I look at that as opportunity. Like when people say, oh, there's nothing else we can do, there are things. And these are all conversations we have in these budget negotiations. And they're not always necessarily partisan because, a prison or a college might be in a Republican member's district, and, they're trying to fight for their home district. So probably another big win, I'll just say, is we were able to advance some Medicaid reforms that were really important. I think we need to do better in terms of verification of income and who's qualified versus who may not. We did a lot to try to rein in this GLP-1 drugs for weight loss. It was a huge mistake. This is a topic that's kind of backwards. You can have administrations that say, we're going to spend this on this now, and then we got to clean up the mess because it's kind of open-ended then, and we have to do supplementals. So now we're looking at kind of putting a framework. Are you pre-diabetic? Do you have pre-authorization? And it's not just used willy-nilly all over the place. There's things that we can do better like that. In our SNAP program, we want to definitely reduce the error rate. Pennsylvania has one of the highest error rates. It's like 17%. And these are billion-dollar programs, big ticket dollar items. And we want to make sure that, those who truly need it are getting it. And that means removing a lot of the waste or errors that are there. I think the error rate was to the tune of about $2.6 billion. And so I'm putting my optimist hat on. There's a lot of work that we can do here. And a lot of times your ability to change it or not depends on the pieces on the chessboard that the voter sends you. And, that's obviously every 2 years, it'll be a new framework for people here.
Some pundits said that Governor Josh Shapiro didn't really do enough early on to bring the two sides together to resolve this, perhaps during the late summer months. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I would say so. You got to kind of be in the building in order to do it. And I have no problem saying this because anyone could check a video. I probably spend more time in this building than any member here because of the role that I'm in. And it was a long summer. And, I get to see who's here, who's not. It wasn't very much appreciated when we were here. And he's up in the Northeast taking shots at the legislature for not getting the budget done. But yet, okay, you're making those comments from Northeast Pennsylvania. Like, why aren't you here? And with such a slim majority also in the House right now, and which way things could go over there, you'd like him to come in with his gubernatorial bully pulpit a little bit and try to move some things. So, but listen, at the end of the day, I've said this. I think one thing that really makes this difficult, I've seen divided government in the past where you had the Rundell years and when they did have the control of the House, and they usually came to the budget table on the same page with this, again, talking with some Republicans. If your House and the governor are not on the same page on various issues, then who am I negotiating? It's okay, it's great. I got a deal here on this subject with the governor. Then the House says, no way. Or you think you have a deal with the House and the governor says, no way. that makes this process extremely difficult and much longer. And unfortunately, that's what we saw in this. I have no problem telling the public, and I said it all along, that the SEPTA issue, I remember in August when that finally revealed the deal that was going to be put forth, we negotiated that with them throughout the whole entire summer. It was my team that found the excess money in that transit fund that was not being utilized and brought it to their attention. Everyone seemed to be on board until the day of when people were unhappy, and all of a sudden they weren't on board again. Again, another piece of this puzzle, because getting the transit done was really being worked on with other issues getting done. And so it was like a reset of the playing field of priorities for each side. And that kind of changed the dynamic. But, like I said, for anyone who wonders, well, when did they start the budget? Our team has started this budget process. And I'll even say the governor has started in terms of getting all his agencies aligned. That was happening even during the delay with this budget getting done. And our teams are already working hard, working towards next year to get us moving. Now, we got to get to the governor's budget address and see what he's officially going to try to ask for, which it's going to be really interesting this year. Because in theory, every dollar above, right off, if things are flat funded, we still have a $5 billion hole. So every penny that he goes above that, it's going to make it, you're guaranteeing, or what's going to be the tax increase. And I tell people, when people say they want to increase spending, say, well, please tell me along with that, which PIT, what tax do you want to raise that's going to go along with that? Because there is no more runway. There's no more funny money. No one can claim, oh, we got all this in reserves. It's gone.
One of the things that I found fascinating, what we're just talking about is, and I think a lot of people don't understand. You hear Senate Republicans are talking 49, governors talking 51.4. The average Pennsylvanian is like, meet somewhere in the middle, but it's much more complicated puzzle as it all comes together.
And I tried my best. If you go back to my floor speeches, first we passed the last year's budget, right? And I'll just use that as an example. That 47.6 budget, which was last year's budget, that still had a $3 billion structural deficit. It used the remainder of the fund balance, not the rainy day fund, the fund balance, and getting people to understand that like, even that point, and every penny that we went above that would have widened that structural deficit, or have to dip into the rainy day fund, which was another huge win for us to avoid that this time. It's tough to get people to explain. People throw numbers around out here. I have leaders in this building that I've watched on podcasts, not this one, but others that said, oh, we don't have a structural deficit. And I'm like spinning in my chair thinking, are you kidding me? It's one of the most known things, that we have. We're spending more than we're taking in. And so, I'm a math is guy, at the end of the day. And, I felt like I told the truth, and everyone makes decisions based on what the real factual numbers are. But at the end of the day, we're bringing in, high 45s, 46 in terms of revenue. And now we're at 50.5 and we have to somehow make that up. And there's only two ways to do it. And it's either reducing spending or increasing taxes. And probably since my time here, at least for 2026, my belief is that you will never see a more clear choice for the voters as to which direction they want to go, because one of them will have to happen, because unlike our federal counterparts, we can't print money, we can't borrow money to pay operating costs. And so we'll see what they end up saying.
You've been very kind with your time today. I'll give you the last word. Was there anything that you wanted to make sure that our listeners knew about the budget process and what we're looking at going into next year?
Yeah, I hope people really understand that we really take our job in terms of what the math and being truthful in our budgeting. It's really been a goal of mine since becoming appropriations chair, that people really understand, because over time, there's a lot of people that will play games with the budget, right? They will roll payments into future years or things like that. And it's one thing I really wanted to get away from. But most importantly is every decision that we're fighting for, the policy wins to go with things that unfortunately we had to buy this time, are really meant to address the issue of Pennsylvania's becoming more of a leader in terms of economic growth, and more importantly, dealing with our demographic challenges that we have. And I feel like over the last 3 years, including this year's budget, that little by little we're putting the planks in place, a foundation that can lead to growth. Because quite frankly, and the old adage is, if you're not growing, you're dying. And we cannot, even if you're a fan of funding certain government programs, we got to have revenue that's generated to pay for that. And when you have a growing one that costs more, and you're shrinking the people who are your workforce, that are your tax generators, and that's shrinking, it doesn't add up. And we're trying to combat that. And I feel like we have this ship kind of pointed in the right direction. It's just, I just don't want to undo that fiscal stability that could undo that. So, but that's what we're working hard to do, and keep our kids here to raise their families for a more prosperous future in PA.
My thanks to State Senator Scott Martin, the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, for taking some time to join us today on Voices of Reason. Senator Martin, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Steve. It was great to be with you.